Me, a bro.
Yep.
He, a dude.
That's good stuff. All right. Let's try it. Okay. Welcome to the We Will Journey podcast. We're talking about faith and life as it happens, and not the glossy exterior we wish it was.
Oh.
What, man? What did I do wrong?
I think you said it's because all the things I was thinking about before. But we can edit that. You got that part good.
Oh.
You got it good. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay, just...
Now it's your turn.
Good?
Yeah.
Wait. We're going to get under the surface. I should have said all those things before. We should have waited down and dirty until after we read this part.
Okay.
Okay. Wait. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty. Okay. Maybe we should. It doesn't have to be word for word, right?
No. I mean, I gave an interpretation.
Okay. All right. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty of life as it pertains to our beliefs, our relationships, politics, and absolutely everything else.
Oh, there we go. That was good. All right.
Hey guys, thanks for checking in today. Want to make sure you don't forget to check out our awesome artists who are part of this podcast. We have Jane Gilman, who's been doing our theme song, and we have Clemens Eisner, who's been kind enough to lend us some of his awesome jams. Make sure you check them both out at YouTube or at janegilman.com. You can check her out and just keep enjoying their music, man. We thank you guys for supporting us and them. Catch you later.
Three, 2, 1.
I like the little beep every time.
Well, hello. You get a little beep. Hello, Seth. It's good to hear your voice today.
It is good. It's good to hear my voice. I mean, it's good to hear your voice as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I've told you that a lot of times, right? I think you have more of a voice for radio. I have more of a voice for
podcasting.
Do
you think? No. I have more of a radio voice. You have more of a podcasting.
So radio voice isn't necessarily just tied specifically to radio. It's just a term for like your voice sounds good when it's recorded.
Oh, okay.
If that makes sense,
all right.
Because podcasts haven't been around that long. I don't know if you knew that, but and so like it's still like a term like radio voice. To me, that's encompassing a lot of things. I think you have a good voice.
Okay.
A good voice to be recorded, whether it's for radio, podcasts, commercials, whatever, right? And so when I hear your voice, it's always a good thing because it's just a good voice. You have a strong voice.
Wow. Well, thank you. To me, it just sounds like my voice, and so it doesn't have the same effect on me,
Well, it is. It's because part of it is because we can't really totally hear our own voice, right? I mean, we hear our own voice, but it's always going to be a bit different. No?
I don't know. I don't know what the brain science is on our voices. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think people? Do you think musicians hear their voice and their? I mean, I know we're always more critical of ourselves, but you think like Mariah Carey or somebody that's just got a really amazing voice hears their voice and is just like, I don't like that. Just doesn't sound right to me. Do you think they hear it differently because it's their own?
I would imagine they do a little bit, but I would think if you have a really good voice, you're probably told so often from a young age that you have a good voice that you probably would start to believe it pretty quick. And I'm sure people, if you're a musician and a good singer, I'm sure that you have a good ear. Does that make sense? like, I don't know, if you just have a good voice in general, maybe you don't necessarily recognize it if you don't use it for your work. But if you're like a professional musician or professional singer, then you probably in general have a good voice for just knowing like who is a good singer, who has a good sound or whatever. So you probably could recognize that in yourself as well, I'd imagine, if that makes sense. Because there's got to be there's got to be, you know, you have to have probably a good ear yourself if you're a good singer, or maybe comes hand in hand a little bit. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, just probably just because, you know, it's you. I think we always hear ourselves differently to some extent. You know, or we're just more critical than we would be of anybody else. You know, when it's not, a lot of actors and actresses won't watch their own work.
Yeah.
Have you heard that before? That there's a lot of different people out there that just won't watch their own films, and they just don't want to see that. They're just too critical of it.
Yeah, I have heard that. And I think I've heard too, you know, in some of those like interviews and stuff that I've heard that they also don't like it sometimes because it's like, I moved on, I'm working on something else now, and I need to be totally focused on this new thing. I could also imagine that being a thing, you know, like as an actor, especially like these really good actors that kind of immerse themselves into a role, right? That you don't want any outside like influences, or like you don't want to take something from a previous role into your new film. And so I could imagine that being like, you know what, I finish a movie, I move on, kind of thing. I don't know. It's kind of interesting, the different parts of that. But I think there's also actors that watch like every one of their films over and over, probably too. But
yeah, some people can't get enough of themselves. But yeah. Yeah. So, well, Seth, we were talking about a documentary that you had watched. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
You watched a documentary about Lance Armstrong. What was the name of it?
It's called Lance, as far as I know. So that's the title. I watched it on. It was actually on Disney Plus. Thank you to my sister for letting me use her account. And it's from ESPN 30 for 30. I don't know if you know any of their stuff, but they, you know, like last 10 years or so, they've been doing sports documentaries mostly, and it was put on by them, and it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty extensive and detailed. It's like 3 hours or so, maybe longer than 3 hours. Can't remember. It might have been like a 4-part thing. And it basically follows his whole entire life from upbringing till current state, where he's at, what he's doing. So, yeah, definitely very fascinating. And the thing that is also is fascinating for me because, I mean, obviously I know who he is, and I've been alive during his whole entire professional career, but I don't think I really was paying that close of attention because that wasn't my. I mean, I guess like a lot of Americans or whatever, that probably wasn't the sport that you're paying the most attention to. And the only reason I knew him, the same reason for someone like Michael Phelps or whatever, is just because they're so dominant at their sport that they override like the thing. And that was one thing they mentioned in the documentary as well. Is it basically became a sport because of Lance Armstrong, and as soon as he left, it was kind of just like, that was fun. Now we're going back to our, our other interests and our other things or whatever. That he basically took. It wasn't like Michael Jordan, who, yes, Michael Jordan was the most famous athlete in the world, probably, and definitely made basketball more popular in a way. But as soon as he left, it's like, hey, look, there's LeBron James, there's Kobe Bryant, there's Shaq, there's whoever, it just keeps going. With him, it was like popular because of him. and then soon he's gone. I don't know. You bike and you do. I just have. Right now, actually, I have an old, kind of a 30-year-old race. I don't know. I'm not actually sure what it was when it was made. I don't know if I told you about my bike. I got it at a flea market. It's a Scott.
Okay.
American brand.
It's a
Scott.
what? A Scott. Okay, yeah, that's a nice bike.
Yeah, and I got it for $100 at a flea market. It was like in pristine condition, and it's 30 years old. Like no rust.
Wow.
Really crazy, super nice bike. But it needed it needed some tuning up and stuff, whatnot. So, but anyways, I'm biking around the city mostly, and a little bit, I go up into the mountains, lower level. But you do a lot of road biking, or have. So were you into that kind of, or were you like following Lance Armstrong during all that?
Yeah, I did. I was not into cycling at that time, but I was obviously just really fascinated by, Lance Armstrong and everything he was achieving. I enjoyed his story. It was captivating, and the Tour de France, at least I always got excited about that. Like I always watched the Tour de France. So it was something that I always kind of plugged into a little bit. And then when he became like legit, it just made it that much better. Because now you have like a reason to watch. Hopefully the United States can do something, and it's kind of like Tiger Woods. Like nobody really watched golf. Golf wasn't mainstream.
It's like a rich man
in the sense that it was
sort of.
Well, it wasn't mainstream in the same sense that it became mainstream when Tiger. Tiger made it.
Oh yeah.
He kind of like crossed all those, divides, where now everybody watched golf. Everybody was wanting to see Tiger play. He just had that kind of clout that drew people into it. And that's what Lance Armstrong did for cycling. He just had some clout and an amazing story. And then he did, which I think is really interesting, what you were talking about just a little while ago, before we started to record, the cancer research part of the story too. But, like this whole doping thing, it was a big, when it all came down, it was like a really big deal, especially with baseball.
Yeah.
And, we had all these big baseball players that were setting all kinds of records, and McGuire and Sosa, and, these home run battles. And I think it was probably Colin Cowherd, who's one of the guys that I listen to quite a bit. Just, basically said, when it was all kind of said and done, like, we'll probably just have to say, they were talking about Hall of Fame votes.
Right.
Should these guys get into the Hall of Fame? And he basically said, yes, they should. But there should be like little asterisks, like this was the doping era. So like for the doping era, these were the best guys. Playing baseball, but they were doing some juice. So I don't know, it's kind of crazy to think about, like they willfully cheated, and they lied about it. These aren't things that we would want our children doing. These were, These are things that we would like to think that we would not do ourselves. Yet, like the documentary pointed out, or what you were talking about, talk about the cancer research that they were alluding to, or interviewed somebody in that field.
Yeah, so
that talked about the impact.
Yeah, there's a lot of fascinating. I mean, so obviously, people who are aware of his story know also that he had testicular cancer, survived even though it was stage 4, which I believe is the worst you can be at. And he had they interviewed the doctor that did the surgery and stuff on him, and it kind of spread. And he said he probably had a 20% chance of survival. And he ended up surviving. He ended up getting back to like full strength, and being able to be a professional bicyclist. What do you say? Professional bicyclist?
Cyclist.
And so incredible, amazing. Whether he had even ever won another tournament again, just his fight and his story, was like so inspiring to so many people. And so because he was not only, a cancer survivor, but also this world famous athlete, he was able to use his platform to raise a ton of money. And they started this Live Strong thing with the armbands, which they go into, and talk about the fact that they had decided, like, they came to him and Nike came to him and said, like, we're going to buy like 5 million of these and we're going to sell them for $1 a piece. And if it works out, we'll have $5 million for your foundation. And they ended up selling, I think they said 60 or 80 million of these armbands. So obviously blew up, And I remember, I don't know if I had one, but I remember tons of people having one. I think I did have one, yeah. I was talking.
I mean, those little wristbands became cool because of Lance Armstrong.
Yeah, and
without those wristbands, I don't even think there would be the "What Would Jesus Do?" Wristband. That wouldn't even be a thing. Like culturally, that became, without those wristbands, there is no wristband.
Well, especially it was like the start of those kind of gummy ones. Because before that, I remember just having like cloth kind of more ones, and then those were kind of that gummy style, and then a lot of other people started doing gummy wristbands and whatnot. But one thing that was so fascinating, right? And I mentioned, they interviewed this one person in particular. She was also an athlete, and she also got diagnosed with cancer at a really young age. And she said that she did not know, and her doctor did not reveal it. And back then, I guess, at least according to her, a lot of the doctors, and either they weren't aware or they just weren't forthcoming with all the information, is something that would happen through chemotherapy is often that you would no longer be able to get pregnant or be able to produce the things you need to whether male or female, in order to have a baby. And so Lance Armstrong did this interview where he talked about that very openly, and he said, that he and his wife had decided, and I think it was when they were newly married. I'm not sure exactly the timeline, but basically he had like saved a bunch of his sperm, I think, and frozen it so that down the road they could still have kids, even though he had gone through chemotherapy. And she, this lady they interviewed, like, she found that out, and so she did the same thing for herself, which allowed her to have 4 kids. Eggs. Yeah, freeze her eggs, and allowed her to have 4 kids down the road. And she said her doctor never, ever even mentioned that, and nothing she had read or heard when she was about to start chemotherapy. And the only reason, it was kind of like she had seen this guy, Lance Armstrong. He's also a young athlete fighting cancer, and so that's how she discovered that. And so they were just saying, that is like one of many stories of people whose lives were changed because of the openness he had. They said in general, testicular cancer was not something men talked about. If they're going through that, it was kind of often a very isolating and private thing. And through his outspokenness and his fight that he had, it became just like a nationwide thing that was known, and people were more aware. He also did a lot with breast cancer, and helping those women and stuff, and men and women, and just in general, like he took away a lot of the, like, it sounded like stigma and those kind of things, right? And then obviously, within the decade, he got in trouble for or it came out that he had been cheating in cycling, and that he had taken drugs this whole time and had lied thousands of times to every reporter and news outlet and press conference or whatever. And he threw so many people under the bus. That's the thing that's so fascinating, is there was people starting to come out about it. Either people got caught or they came out themselves about it, and he would basically just be like, no, that guy's a liar, or I wasn't part of that, whatever, and just like totally distance himself from these people. And so that's the part where I think a lot of people struggle. And one thing he was really, really hurt by, which is very fascinating, is like, as soon as that came out that he was like basically 100%, he was convicted of all these things, and almost went to prison because he had lied in front of a jury and stuff like that. They stripped him of his association with Livestrong, which is the thing that he basically started, and he was totally disconnected from that. He was no longer a part of it. And he was like, hey, I understand. I was an idiot. I did a lot of dumb things, but that doesn't erase all the things that I was able to do for good. And that's where, that's where, as like a viewer, right, or someone outside of the situation, it'd be interesting to know what you think, is like, what side are you kind of on? Do you throw out the baby with the bathwater, completely, and be like, well, it's all tainted. His name shouldn't be a part of any of these kind of things. We'll just move on without him. Or to be like, hey, this person is flawed. For me, it kind of reminds me of David in the Bible, or of Paul, Saul who becomes Paul, or all these people that like God used, right? And I'm not saying Lance Armstrong. I have no idea if he's a believer. I wouldn't say that. It just reminded me in a similar sense how God uses us, loves to use flawed, broken people to do amazing things. And then like someone like Lance Armstrong, who obviously did a lot of horrible things, hurt a lot of people, lied a ton, but also because of his life, because of who he was, because of the things he accomplished, and because of how much he cared about people, there was thousands of people who were affected, and some people probably even their lives were saved because of the the money and the resources and the advancements that took place in cancer research. Email. That's right, I said email. Seems like everybody's got one these days, even us. So if you want to get in contact with us or chat about the weather, you can shoot us an email at wewilljourney.connect@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing from you, or reading from you.
Yeah, that's the part that I really found fascinating, was the amount of money that was raised for cancer research because of him. And therefore all of the, good that is basically a direct result of what he did. That's kind of, that's pretty amazing, to think about. It's definitely the old, I don't know if it's an old adage, but it's just like, it's like the defense of large corporations sometimes. maybe they pollute the environment, or there's some negative aspect to what they do, but they always point to, but without this thing, like this doesn't exist, so they point to the good that they do, and they try to have a scale, and the good kind of outweighs the bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so Lance Armstrong is a lot like that, like there's obviously this element of lying, cheating, and that kind of thing going on. But at the same time, there's all this good that's taking place at the same time. Seth, have you ever have you had some sort of lie in your life that you've lived out and had to continue lying about for like an extended period of time? Have you ever had anything like that in your life?
So it's fascinating. I'm going to answer the question and also point to something that was really interesting that was said in this documentary. Is he said, like, there's basically, once you start cheating, then you have to be prepared to lie, because otherwise it's basically all for nothing. Because once you cheat, no matter what happens, it's going to come up and somebody's going to ask you. And he said, a lot of people, that's the hardest part, is the lying part, It's like, it's not doing the thing that maybe morally is wrong. It's then lying about it and being able to do that in a convincing manner. And for me, I don't know if it's a product of my parents and how they raised me, but like lying is not something I could really do very well. Not well. Like, I've done a lot of dumb things, and I struggle with a lot of different stuff in my life, but lying is like something that's not been something so much. And so for me, like, if I had something, so for example, like when I was in high school, I got into pornography, or right before high school and then throughout high school. And so that was something I kind of kept hidden, obviously, from a lot of people, and something where I felt really hypocritical, because I'd be, serving at church in different capacities. I was part of small groups and in the high school youth group, I'd go on all these missions trips and whatever. And it wasn't that I wasn't following Christ at all. It was just like I had this thing in my life that I knew was wrong, and I was reminded constantly that it was wrong. Also, I think personally from the Holy Spirit. But yet, like, it was something I was kind of hiding from myself. But if someone asked me about it, what's interesting is, like, someone asked me about it, then I would talk about it. It's just people didn't really ask about it, which is kind of fascinating to think back on. And maybe I can't, it's a long time ago, so I can't say like, oh, no one ever asked me and I never ever lied about it, because I can't remember every situation, but I do remember specific situations, like where my brother asked me, like, hey, you been struggling with pornography? and so I kind of had to, that's just who I was. Like, I had to, like, be honest about it. And that was part of the key. That was part of the key of the healing and what God used in my life to get me out of it. But thinking back on it, there wasn't enough of that. There wasn't very much of that. And I don't know how you've experienced things like that in your life, but for me, it's not so much like the lying. Like, for whatever reason, like, that's just not something that I've been as tempted to do. But what I have done is, like, kept something hidden as long as I could, as long as, no one asked me about it. Because, like,
right,
knowing if it comes up, I'm gonna spill the beans, kind of thing. So it's kind of fascinating to think back. Like, I was involved in, I went to junior high youth group, high school youth group. I was involved in different ministries at our church. I was in Christian, small groups and things like that. And I don't think I was really asked like, hey, do you struggle with this? You know, do you struggle with pornography? Do you struggle with lust? Do you struggle with these things?
Yeah. We would rather not know, most of the time. Most of those circles, it's like, just don't tell me. I really don't want to know, as a leader.
Uh-huh.
like, I don't really want to know what's going on. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an interesting, subject. I had, so when I was 7, I had a pretty traumatic accident where I almost lost my arm. I had a partially amputated arm.
Wow.
And that's why my left arm is all scarred up. I assume you knew that, but
I
maybe you
didn't know.
didn't.
So I think I've heard the story. I knew your arm was scarred up, but I couldn't remember the specifics.
Yeah, and I honestly don't know how this started, right? But as a young man, I felt like kind of that heavy weight of lying about something in regards to my arm. So what happened was, I was obviously too young to be working in a car wash, but my parents managed a car wash, and I would, after school or on the weekends or whatever, I would help, wipe down cars in the back of the wash. And I would work with primarily teenagers that, had a gig working at the car wash, and so, but there was this towel extractor, and it would kind of wring out the towels so they were damp, so it was like the spin cycle on your washing machine. Well, one of the teenagers had showed me this cool trick. Like, if you put a wet towel on that center spindle thing, and then turn it on, the safety on that towel extractor didn't work. So when you open the lid, it was supposed to shut off, but it didn't work anymore. So it would just keep going. It had probably been disabled. So you could put this towel on the spindle and kick it on, and it kind of made like a hat. It almost looked like a sun hat or something, and it would spin around. And then what they would do is they would kind of tap it with their hand. You could tap the towel with your hand. It was like hard, and it would kind of bounce off of it. And so the day I hurt my arm, this is what I was doing. I was playing with this, this machine with this towel on the spindle, and I was bouncing my hand off of it, and it sucked my arm in and basically just ripped it off. And so that became something we didn't really talk about. I don't know how. Even to my parents, like, yes, I had an accident, but we didn't really talk about the specifics of the accident.
Wow.
So in my mind, it felt like, it felt a little bit like I was living a lie, because this is something that almost everybody asked me about, on a regular basis, especially, after that time, what happened, and we just didn't talk about the specifics of it. And to me, it felt like I was lying about it, because I wasn't being totally honest, in my description of that story. So I can kind of relate, to Lance Armstrong and having this thing in your life that, you just continue to kind of perpetuate. I've felt something, obviously it was to a lesser extent. I think we just kind of left it at, it was an accident, but, I didn't talk about kind of how I participated in making that accident happen, because I probably felt ashamed and, a lot of other things about it. And I honestly, I don't know if I've ever described all of that to my parents. I don't remember anymore. It's been such a long time ago, but maybe I did, but I've just forgotten. But yeah. So it's kind of a weird little thing in my own past, but I can relate to at least a little bit of what he was feeling. That you feel like you kind of feel like, you have to continue that story that you've put out there. You can't change it now. There's this pressure that you feel internally. So
what got you to the point that we were able to be honest and open about that, or did you get to that point, or did it just kind of get to a point where nobody asked anymore?
Yeah, I think the further you move away from it, and this obviously carries a lot less weight than what Lance Armstrong was lying about. So
a little bit different.
It's a little different. I wasn't going to lose any sponsorships or status because of this situation. I think, the further you get away from it, and as I grew older, and, I was a kid, at the time, so, you kind of go along with whatever your parents are saying, and I don't think they were trying to mislead anybody. They just would say, he had an accident at the car wash with this machine, and and there were some true statements, like that lid, for instance, was defective. It should have stopped. There was a brake on it that wasn't working. And so they just said it was the machine was broken, and when the lid opened, it didn't stop like it should have. But we were manipulating the defect, at the time. So, I was 7. It was a bunch of teenagers. What's a 7-year-old gonna do? They're gonna do whatever the teenagers are doing, and so there's a lot of things that go into it. But yeah, as I got older and just felt like maybe there was a hint of dishonesty there in that story, if somebody asked me about it, then I would share, but most people honestly don't want to know that much detail about something, They're like, what did you do to your arm? I'm not going to tell everybody, well, for part of my life we said this, and now I'm saying this, they don't want to know. I had an accident at a car wash and had a partial amputation. Oh my gosh. Do you have full function of it? Yeah. So that's typically the bulk of the story there. People don't need to know or even want to know all the details
Except
of it.
Maybe junior high boys. No.
Nobody really wanted to know. No, I don't. So, so there's that aspect of it too. But it's just something that I felt internally, though, and I think that, that's the interesting part of it. Regardless of how much people actually care about some of this stuff, there is, this internal part of what's going on, in a person's life when they kind of perpetuate a lie, and you actually feel it. There's something that is felt in this situation that that you can't deny. And so, anyways, it's an interesting thing. And so I guess, all that to say, I can kind of relate to that feeling of like I have to continue this, I have to keep. And then the further down that road you get, I think it does become easier. It becomes easier to just kind of keep up whatever that narrative was that you decided to establish. And maybe in some, to some extent, you just start to believe it, or you've justified it, in your mind, where it's like, hey, especially, in his case where everybody was doping, it was basically the culture of cycling at that time. And, so it's just like, well, if everybody's doing it, and this is what it takes to be competitive in this sport, and everybody's lying about it, it's kind of like speeding on the interstate, but if everybody is speeding, you justify speeding on the interstate because everybody's speeding, and so we call that staying with the flow of traffic. You stay with the flow of traffic, and then some might even say, well, if I didn't speed, it would be dangerous to not speed because all of the other traffic would be passing me. So even though the speed limit is 60, everybody drives 70.
Right.
So I drive 70 as well. So that way I'm not a hazard, on this interstate or freeway, whatever it is. And it's kind of a similar thing, Now I know people will say, no, that's not similar. That's a minor issue. What Lance did was major. But, in a sense, it's all kind of the same stuff,
Hey guys, it's Seth. Some of you might be wondering, I wish there was a way to follow these guys and what they're up to. Well, I don't know if you heard about a little thing called the internet. That's right. If you check us out at twitter.com/WeWillJourney1, you'll be able to keep updated on what we're up to and maybe some future interviews or projects we're working on. Catch yous later. Yeah, I think the thing that is so disappointing, or why so many people were so hurt about what he did, is because then he continued to lie over and over and over again about it, and so adamant. And he even called his friends, some of the people they interview is like kind of friends he had for many years, teammates or whatever, that he called out as liars, even though he was actually the one lying. He basically threw all these people and said, no, you can't believe anything they're saying. They're, they took drugs. Of course, they want to throw everyone else under the bus too. That's why they're, saying this about me and whatnot. And basically just destroyed all these relationships in order for him to keep up his appearance. Because I think one thing I think is one of the most fascinating things about his story and what he says, because he's like super like macho, competitive. Like everyone basically the interview says like he's a bad MFer. Like most cyclists are kind of like introverts, kind of like laid back, chill. A lot of them, are more kind of, nerd types or whatever is how they portray it and how a lot of people talk about themselves. And they're like, but he was like totally different. Like he was just like dominant, basically, whatnot. I think that's part of the reason, kind of same thing with like Michael Jordan, where you see they sort of win at all costs sort of thing. One of the things I thought was so fascinating, though, is at the end he does say, like, basically the reason he got caught is because of that. Is because what happened is he retired after winning like seven Tour de France's in a row. Kind of went off in the sunset sort of thing. And then like 3 years later, he just got the itch, he's just like, what am I doing? I'm just like sitting around, and, I just like basically wanted, that drive was still in him. He's like, I got to win again. And he says, like, in the interview, as he's watching the Tour de France, and he's like, this guy that won is like a joke. He's like, how in the world, like, could this dude win the Tour de France? If he can win it, I could go back and easily win it. And so that was his mindset. But because he went back, then all the stuff came up again, and all the questions and allegations, and then it all basically opened up again. And and it basically ended up leading to him getting caught. And if he would have just, and they say that, like, if he would have just gone off in the sunset, been with his family, raised his kids, whatever, been an ambassador, then it has sort of just been like, even today, everyone would have been like, he's a national hero. But it was like the same drive that led him to cheat, the same drive that led him to accomplish all that, the same drive that led him to, like, beat cancer in the way he did, and, like, bounce back so quickly. That's, like, also was his downfall ultimately. And one of the coolest things, though, was he said, like, I'm so glad I went back, though, because otherwise I wouldn't have gotten caught. And he says, like, I lost everything. I had to sell my house. I had to pay millions of dollars. I had to do all this stuff. I lost my reputation. But he's like, but I couldn't live with myself if I had lived, basically, like, kept up this lie. And that's what's so cool. And it's almost, it's something we talk about as Christians a lot, but I think it's almost like a universal truth that things need to be brought to the light. Otherwise, it'll just keep eating at us and keep getting worse and worse and worse. And, whether it's in a Christian atmosphere where we're confessing to one another or confessing to God, as we're, taught to do from the Bible, or I think even in the world, if you're doing something that is wrong, I think really the only way for there to be healing is for that to be brought to the light, and that was so fascinating and so kind of cool that's like, it almost seems like God, like, set it up that way. It's like, whether you're, with me, a follower of Christ or not, like, this still applies. Living in sin is going to eat you apart. And so it's so cool, kind of. I mean, he basically went to a really dark place after that because his life sort of fell apart, and he was, felt immense amount of shame, and everyone sort of hated him. But he said he wouldn't change it.
Yeah. Well, kind of like, an 8, 9, 10-year-old version of me felt, about my little lie, that weight. For me, there was definitely a lot of freedom just not to try to hide that anymore, to, at that young age, just to be more transparent about it as I got a little older. And even, you alluded to scripture just talking about the different kinds of lies that we can have. You talked about David, when he was confronted about his lie with Bathsheba. In the New Testament, it tells us that if we, go and take communion, or we go to take communion, and somebody has something against us, don't take communion and go reconcile with that person first, so we can take communion with a clear conscience. And then, there's quite a bit of research that talks about, our mental health having direct correlation to our physical health, and it's interesting, in Lance Armstrong's case, like, yeah, he was able to beat the cancer, but could he have beat the lie physically? You know, because physically, had he had to live out that lie for the rest of his life, you know, what might that have done to him?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he may have been a total wreck physically eventually because of it. And like our bodies, you know, they seem to absorb our lies and our deceit and all these things, and eventually it becomes, you know, more than what our bodies can physically deal with, you know. So it's, you know, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting how Scripture points us in a direction as to how we should live our life. A lot of people outside the faith, or even within the faith, like when I was younger, like the Bible sometimes really felt like a major buzzkill, you know, like man, I just want to have some fun, right? You know, I just want to enjoy
no sex, drugs, and rock and roll. What?
I know, right? Like all the things that I'm most interested in. But it turns out, you know, most of Scripture is just very practical, and it really points us towards a lot of healthy living. Even the food laws for its time kept the Israelites away from a lot of the kind of dangerous rabbit holes of that time that they could have gone down with food. Like lamb was actually one of the safest meats to eat at that point in time, historically. So God chose things that would kind of help keep his people healthy and safe. You know, a lot of the relational type things that Scripture points to keeps us healthy and safe emotionally. You know, so there's just all these aspects to Scripture that God really puts in place, and they feel sometimes like, oh man, I just want to go have fun. But the reality is God just loves us, and he wants us, just like we want our own children to be safe and healthy in the world. We don't want them to make some of the same mistakes that we've made. You know, all that stuff, it's similar, right? Even though God hasn't made these mistakes, he's a perfect father, but he still doesn't want us to go down some of these paths and experience some of the pitfalls of life that we would otherwise experience. You know, if we don't kind of adhere to what he's talking about. And the other part of this that I think is interesting, Seth, is that the world typically holds on to this stuff, right? So Lance, not
Okay.
you, but Lance Armstrong, he'll never be the same.
No.
In the eyes of the world because of what he did, right? He'll never be the same. But in Christianity and before God, I think what is interesting is that, you know, our sin does separate us. Just like our sin, you know, so Lance Armstrong has been separated from what he once had, right? And in the eyes of the world, they no longer view him in the same way, right? So just like if a spouse cheats, their husband or wife will never view them in the same light because of that deceit, right, and that affair. But when we sin and we go to God, like, let's say Lance Armstrong is a Christian. You know, he could confess that sin to God, and now he would be totally restored. It's like it never happened, you know? And, you know, so there's just like aspects of this that are good for us. Just, it's kind of like a intellectual exercise to think about some of these things and to really try to do our best to process what that means, and why
Exactly.
Why does our faith have the value that it has, and why is God different? You know, what makes God different? What sets him apart from the world? And this is one of the most powerful things, I think, that sets God apart from everything else that we know and experience, is that ability to forgive and wipe the slate totally clean. You and I actually don't possess the ability to do that in and of ourselves. Like, you know, I don't know if you've tried. Say, God, I don't want your help with this one. I'm going to try to forgive this person on my own. And not only forgive, but I'm going to just like totally just clean slate. This never happened. We can't do it. You know, we just can't do it. Even if we forgive them, there's still going to be a memory there that says, yeah, this happened. You know, this took place. But God, you know, for whatever reason, doesn't even do that. He doesn't really even hold on to that memory of that event, which I find, you know, kind of unreal. And there's the flip side of it, because sometimes we want God to hold on to, you know, the memory of an event for a person that he chooses to forget about, you know, like Saul, for instance. Saul killed people. He had people killed.
Yeah.
It seems pretty unforgivable. In human eyes, that isn't forgivable. And then why on earth would you use that person? You know, it's like he took it another step further. And not only did he forgive him, but he used Saul and gave him a new name to kind of mark something new that had happened in his life. But I'm sure in the early church, I mean, the disciples are like, no, this dude is bad news. You don't want him. You know, we don't want him. That's for sure.
And a lot of them are scared
you know.
of him, right?
Oh, yeah. So, I don't know. It's a neat story. It's an interesting story just to kind of think about. But anyways, thanks for bringing that up, Seth. Like, that was a good little topic, man. So
yeah, I think it's fascinating. There's a lot more things, you know, that we can go into with that, and I guess the closing thing that I'll say is that we just we're reading a biography about Eric Liddell, who was a runner. You know, there's that movie Chariots of Fire is about his life and stuff. He was an English runner back in 1920s, I want to say. And anyways, he was like the best. I think it was 100 meters was his event, but at the Olympics he didn't run it because it was on a Sunday, and he felt the Lord didn't want him to run on Sunday. That's what he felt very convicted about, and so he didn't do it. So he didn't get a medal, obviously. But he like destroyed everybody at, I think it was the 400 meters, which wasn't his. You know, he was okay at it, but it wasn't like his dominant event, and he just wiped everyone out. And it's like so fascinating, like kind of comparing and contrasting that to like someone like Lance Armstrong, who had all this success, but did it kind of with an immoral way. And thinking like, I wonder sometimes, you know, how God does that. One thing that book brings up with Eric Liddell is like, would Eric Liddell have won if he had been disobedient to what God was calling him to do, you know? Maybe he would have done it and he would have lost. But then sometimes, like Lance Armstrong, you win and you win and you win and you win and win, and you do it in a way that's maybe not glorifying to God, and then everything crashes down, and you have to live with this burden. So I don't know. I was just thinking about that, like the compare and contrast, and how God calls us to things sometimes that aren't what we would choose, definitely not what the world would choose. But ultimately, there's
Yeah.
there's ultimate fulfillment and reward. If we believe what Scripture says, reward in heaven, storing up those treasures in heaven.
Well, yeah. Well, and there's the other part of that too. That is eventually, you could have somebody that chooses to lie and cheat their whole life, and they may never get caught. But, the biblical story tells us that eventually they do have to come clean. They eventually will have to answer to, the one authority that really matters, and so even if somebody never gets caught here on earth, eventually they do have to, give account, for the truth and what really happened. Right. And so that's the other part of that too.
Well, man, it's good talking.
Yeah. I have to pack for a youth group ski trip, and it sounds like we may run into some weather, so my phone is actually blowing up as we're talking today. Everybody's texting me, and so good times, man. Good times.
Maybe you guys will just go there and drink some hot cocoa and watch the blizzard or something. Maybe there won't be a lot of the skiing going on. Who knows? But it's fun, right?
Yeah.
Going to the mountains, hopefully. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm excited about it. So, all right, brother, love you, man. We'll talk to you next week.
Too. See you then.
A tiny boat, a murky lake. I blink and slowly come awake. A worn out sun, my ankles ache. I must have been here for a long, long time. One box besides my feet, filled with stones from underneath. A dirty rope tied to my feet, and now I'm thrown into that freezing water. I've been drowned, I sink to the ground. The box pulls me down while beans turn greener. I've been drowned, I'm trying to shout, but no one hears the sound of screaming when you've been drowned. One box fades into the brackish fog. My toes land on muddy fleece next to rotten logs. It's hard to move, I feel like I'm locked in a cotton cage. The swamps all up by silent like a grave. Blurry figures sneaking through the creeper's wood. Impromptu adoption is far too well understood. Dull acceptance vital to this underwater culture, while the spikes cycling us like vultures. I've been drowned, I sink to the ground. The box pulls me down while beans turn greener. I've been drowned, I'm trying to shout, but no one hears the sound of screaming when you've been drowned. If you help me put a stone out of my box, one by one might just be able to float to the surface. I've been drowned. I've been drowned. I've been drowned. I sank to the ground. The box pulls me down while beams turn greener. I've been drowned. I'm trying to shout, but no one hears the sound of screaming. I've been drowned. I sank to the ground. The box pulls me